I'm Neil Hamilton, Professor of Law and Director of the Agricultural Law Center at Drake University. I want to welcome you to this installment of our series, Law for Landowners, 10 Things You Should Know. Today, our topic is about farm managers. The first point to think about is, well, who is a farm manager and who do farm managers serve? Well, many landowners in American agriculture actually aren't able to operate the land. They're either what we used to refer to as absentee owners, or perhaps they're retired farmers or people who have inherited farm property. Oftentimes, these people are referred to today as non-operator landowners. Well, if you're a non-operator landowner, one of the questions becomes, well, who is it that actually operates or manages the farm? Well, this could be a family member. It could be a trusted tenant, someone you've worked with for many years. But in situations where the non-operating landowner doesn't actually have that type of relationship or contact with somebody in the neighborhood, then the issue is, well, who actually represents and helps them work with managing the farm? This is where farm managers come in. A farm manager is a person who is hired by a landowner to help them manage their farm operation. The second point to recognize then is thinking about, well, what exactly is the role of the farm manager? Well, farm managers can provide a range of services depending on what the farmland owner needs. I mean, these services typically would involve helping locate who may be the tenant and helping manage the relationship with the tenant, whoever's actually operating the farm. But the services from farm managers can go much farther than that. It can include advice on marketing the commodities, what crops to raise, making investments on the farm, such as installing conservation practices. So the idea with a farm manager is you're actually employing a professional whose job is to think about how to get the most out of the farm. And getting the most out of it may be a function of the finances, how much can be produced, could be the enjoyment of owning the property, or it could be all of those different issues together that go along with owning and having a farm. The third point to keep in mind about farm managers is to recognize how you can distinguish what being a farm manager is from other forms of relations, such as a custom farming or a typical farm lease. Well, first, the actual agreement between a farm manager and a landowner is going to be controlled by what's typically a detailed written contract that's going to set out the various types of services that the farmland owner is obtaining from the farm manager. For example, record keeping and bill paying and negotiating various relations. So in this situation, the farmland owner is essentially delegating under this agreement to the farm manager many of the day-to-day decisions. In most situations, that relationship is considered to legally be creating an agent for a principal. Now, on the other hand, you would have a typical farm lease. Well, a lease involves essentially a conveyance of property between the landowner or the landlord and the tenant. And so the tenant has responsibility for operating, running the farm, making the decisions, all of those things that would typically happen on a farm. A third type of relationship that may be less common, but that people may have heard of, is custom farming. In this situation, a custom farm isn't the same thing as a lease because there's no legal conveyance of the property. Instead, a custom farming relation is essentially hiring someone on a per practice basis and paying them based on what they're doing. Planting a crop, taking care of it, harvesting it. But the custom farmer doesn't own the crop, doesn't have any legal right to the underlying property as a tenant might under a lease, and you aren't typically involving then a third party such as the farm manager. The fourth point to keep in mind when hiring a farm manager or thinking about hiring one is to identify what your goals are for the property. And of course, these goals for a farm may be producing a crop, but there may be other goals. Perhaps it's hunting property that you want to maintain for the wildlife values. Or it may be any number of different factors or features that come from managing property. Identifying your goals will help you be able to communicate them to a farm manager in terms of what they're expecting to deliver for you, and it'll also help you identify who the best farm manager or farm management company may be for you with the particular goals you have in mind for your property. So you'll want to ask, for example, of whether or not your farm manager is accredited under the National Farm Manager Accreditation Service. You'll also want to ask about what type of staff resources they have, because the more people that they may have on the staff, or the broader range of expertise they have to draw on, means they may be able to help provide you with a wider range of services and a better level of expertise or understanding of some of the complicated questions that might arise with agriculture, whether it's participation in farm programs or the application of water law, for example, if you're dealing with irrigated land. So the important point is to ask questions, to learn as much as you can, and then use that information to try to make an informed choice. The sixth point to think about is the nature of the financial relationship between you and the farm manager. Of course, part of this relationship is going to be a function of the nature of the communications and how often you stay in touch, what you hear from them, what type of information they're providing to you about the decisions they're making, the expenses that they may be incurring, and of course, the revenue that the farm may be generating. When it comes to the issue of fees, there are typically two ways that farm managers may be paid. A common relationship or arrangement is to actually be paid a percent of the gross income that's generated by the farm. And if you enter into a farm management contract, one of the important provisions to actually try to understand is that description of the fees and the process, the amount, the timing, the responsibility, what other types of fees could possibly be charged. A second way that farm managers may in fact be compensated is to charge a flat fee per acre for the services they provide. I can't really say that one form is better than the other, but the important question is for you to understand what you're obtaining in terms of services, and then also what you can expect to be charged to pay for those services. The seventh point to think about with a farm management relationship is the nature of the legal relation between the parties. As I mentioned before, this is typically treated under the law as an agency. This means that you as the principal have entered into an agreement with this person or with a company in which you're making them your agent. And under that agreement, you're essentially giving them wide-ranging authority to make decisions on your behalf. Now that might not include, and typically wouldn't, the right to sell the property, but it would, for example, give them the right to enter into a lease with a tenant, or to change the terms of a lease agreement, or maybe even to terminate a lease. It depends, of course, on exactly what the provisions are that you've signed. But as you think about it from the perspective of a farm manager, they want to have the authority to be able to make the decisions that they think are necessary. You're acquiring them for their expertise and their professional judgment, and so they want to be able to exercise that. So understanding the nature of the relationship and what that may mean in terms of the responsibility you would have. For example, if they have the right to enter into purchase agreements to acquire products or services, that means you also have the responsibility to pay for them. So understanding the relationship and having a discussion about, well, what exactly can you do on my behalf? Or are there certain things that you might not want them to do, but instead would want to have special permission or communication about? That's an important part of establishing this type of relation. The eighth point to consider is that an important part of farm management deals with how you participate in various federal farm programs. These may either be the farm programs that relate to providing farm payments, crop insurance, various types of subsidies, or it may mean participating in federal conservation programs, such as the Conservation Reserve Program, or obtaining cost sharing to pay for conservation practices under EQIP, the Environmental Conservation Incentives Program. Well, under most farm management agreements, and as we mentioned, under the agency relationship that you've created, the agreement gives the farm manager the authority to enter into these farm programs on your behalf. And in fact, the USDA has documents that would include the power of attorney in which you sign those documents authorizing other people to act on your behalf and to make decisions for participation in programs. So this is an important dimension of the farm management relationship that you need to understand. The ninth point to keep in mind is thinking about the various provisions or major parts of an agreement that you might have with a farm manager. We've already talked about several of those. The nature of the legal relationship, which is an agency, the ability to, for example, find a tenant, and to participate in farm programs. But there are other important provisions of those agreements that you would need to think about. The financial record keeping, for example, the nature of the communication concerning the finances, the frequency of the communication. What do you hear? What do you have access to, for example? You'll also want to know, well, what's the length of time of this agreement? Is it just an annual contract? Does it renew itself automatically? Is there a certain period where I have to have provided advance notice? So knowing how long the agreement runs for. This can become particularly important, for example, if you might have some disagreement or misunderstanding between you and the farm manager, such that you have some type of conflict. Thinking about what might happen in those circumstances. None of us enter into an agreement planning on having it go bad or having it be violated, but would be foolish not to at least think about, well, what does happen if for some reason there's a conflict or a disagreement, or we need to terminate a relation, or if our plans or needs might change. And so those are the type of issues it's also important to think about in terms of a farm management agreement and a relationship that you're entering into. The 10th and final point to remember is the need to keep active and to stay involved. Even though the fact that you need a farm manager means that you may not live close by or be able to be involved in the day-to-day operation of the farm, doesn't mean that you don't have an interest in the farm or that you shouldn't stay on top of what's happening. Staying in regular communication, asking questions, certainly reading the reports that you're provided are an important part of this process. It is your land. You have the long-term interest in how it's used, and you have some plans for its future. The role of the farm management agreement is to help you find a professional that can let you live out those dreams and expectations and achieve those goals. So staying active and staying involved is an important part of being able to achieve that desired end. Well, thank you for watching this episode of Law for Landowners, about 10 things you should know about farm management agreements. This has been Professor Neil Hamilton from the Drake University Agricultural Law Center.